Hello, I'm Brad Edwards. Thank you for joining with us. Thank you for streaming with us here on CBS News Chicago. Topic we're going to talk about today, something we don't want to talk about. It's kind of that time of year again when we talk about SAD, Seasonal Affective Disorder. To enlighten us, we're bringing in a friend of the stream and a pro in this topic, Dr. Sally Weinstein, licensed clinical psychologist, associate professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. It is that time of year, is it not, Dr. Weinstein? That temperatures are dropping. We just lost an hour of sunlight.
Yes, it is this time of the year as the days get shorter and darker and colder, where many start to experience kind of the winter blues. And that's sort of on the mild end, but on the more severe end, we do see pretty significant changes in mood and behavior. In some people, that's called seasonal affective disorder.
Symptoms include what?
So the symptoms are actually the same symptoms that we would use to diagnose major depression. And seasonal affective disorder is a subtype or a form of major depression. And it's things like feeling sad or down most of the day, more days than not, feeling less pleasure or joy in our activities, more feeling like we're going through the motions, changes in sleep and appetite. Usually in this winter form of depression, we see overeating or increased appetite and oversleeping and greater fatigue, as well as some withdrawal from friends, wanting to isolate, and on the more severe end, thoughts of death or dying.
Okay, so I will just be frank. I am on the less severe end of this, but I mean it's like clockwork. I mean, it hits, and I mean, it's increased appetite. It is wanting to sleep in. It is wanting to hibernate, if you will. But I've gotten good at, like, I've got to force myself to get up in the morning. I've got to get to the gym. I've got to get the endorphins going, even though it's like all of a sudden it's become 5 times harder than it was in the summer. Why is that?
Well, what you're experiencing is what so many experience. And it's that what we believe is that it's really that shortened light period causes pretty significant effects on our biology and makes it really hard to adjust, in particular, as the days get shorter, to that less amount of light. And there may be some biological changes that can explain some of that. Increased melatonin production, which makes us feel more lethargic and more sleepy, that kind of hibernation feeling. Changes in the way our body regulates serotonin and dopamine. Those are chemicals that regulate our mood and our sleep-wake cycle. And some of those changes can really explain what you're feeling at this time of year. There's also a lot of negative expectations about it being cold, particularly living in Chicago, kind of losing that social life that you had during the summer. And so there's some of those expectations that become a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. So it all kind of works in concert together to give rise to this desire to hibernate. But you're doing all the right things. You are forcing yourself to get up in the morning, to keep with your routine, to be getting that exercise, to be getting outside. And that's really one of the top ways to try to stave off some of these effects.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. It says here 10 million Americans have some form of seasonal affective disorder. I don't even know if I would really be diagnosable with it, but I am like, how does anybody not have it? Like, it is such a dramatic, maybe not everyone has a diagnosable version of this, but doesn't everybody suffer some bit of the blues from the drop in the temp and the no daylight? It affects, I would imagine, many, many more, doesn't it?
Yes. So kind of our best estimates are that about 5% of Americans experience the more severe end, what we would diagnose as seasonal affective disorder, where you're experiencing the symptoms of major depression that kind of start in the late fall and early winter with improvement in the spring and summer. But on that milder end, it's estimated that 10 to 20% of people experience kind of subclinical or subthreshold symptoms. But like you said, who doesn't feel the change of temperature and feel the change of daylight in some way or form?
Yeah, so if you are, I mean, obviously if you have, major symptoms of this and major depressive-like symptoms, you need to see a professional. If you're not there, but realize, I mean, I hate to sound like we're in 1950s, but you got a case of the blues that just happens to last for a couple months, or even until you adjust to the lack of light and the freeze out. What are some, you hinted at it earlier talking with me, stay with your routine, get up, try to get out and walk. What are some other recommended things? Anything dietary, so on and so forth? Because I mean, it's got to be one of the things that people are like, give me a pizza too, right? Like it's got to be probably watch what you eat, right?
Right. So, as we're experiencing these changes, we have this desire to hibernate, like you were saying, to stay in, to eat, kind of carb-rich foods, and to curl up at home. And so while you want to embrace the winter a little bit and give into some of that and being cozy, you also want to fight some of it and really try to stick with a routine that includes regular exercise, healthy eating habits, getting outdoors, and staying with friends. The things that you would do kind of more spontaneously in the summer or when it's lighter out, you really want to make that effort and be planful to do as the days start to shorten. And I think knowing that this happens for you, like you said, like clockwork, this is what happens, and you've really got to stick with your routine. So knowing that this is kind of your own pattern and being prepared for it can sort of set you up for success for these winter months.
Yeah. Are there a particular group more affected than others, or a broad range?
That's a great question. So there's some research to indicate that people who live further north experience this even more dramatically. The biggest risk factors are already having an existing mood disorder or other mental health difficulties, either in yourself or in your family. So you're sort of at risk for these difficulties already. There's also some research to suggest that women experience this more often than men.
It's interesting. It is a fascinating, seasonal depression is a fascinating thing, isn't it? Because most of us would think, well, it's genetic, it's something in our makeup, but then to have something exacerbated by meteorological conditions. Do people who typically get seasonal affective disorder, even if they're fine, unmedicated the rest of the year, might they still have something underlying, or do some people actually it's strictly weather related?
That's a great question. I don't know that we know that specifically, but I think that you're certainly at greater risk of having other mental health difficulties if you do experience this seasonal pattern. But there are some people who really just experience this probably on the more mild end, just with the change of seasons. And we know that there's something that happens in our biology as there is less light. And some people just seem to be particularly vulnerable to those effects. So it affects all of us to some degree, but is exacerbated, like you said, in some.
What do you recommend from low end to high end? Obviously, high end, if you need help, get a hold of a medical professional. But low end, people, I would call them the silent strugglers, the individuals who just, but every day, it seems like Sisyphus and pushing the rock up the mountain and it never ends. What do you recommend? And what do you recommend people do if they think they know someone who is kind of silently suffering through this bout?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest message is that this is something that can be treatable and that we can do things about. So we can't change the fact that winter is coming, but we can do a lot to prepare ourselves kind of for some of the cognitive changes and some of the behavioral changes that come along with winter. And so the first step, I think, is just knowing that this is coming and that you are susceptible to these changes, and also that there's a biological explanation for these changes. It's not that you're just lazy in the winter or you like to to eat a lot of carbohydrates in the winter, that there's a biological explanation for what's happening in your body. And that can both take away the stigma of seeking help, but also really be a motivator to do things a little bit differently to sort of protect against and prevent some of those biological changes. So reaching out for help, if you have a friend in need, making sure to check in with them, make plans with them, get them out of their house, keep them scheduled and social and active. For yourself, I like to think about being really planful for unstructured periods. So like the weekends or the evenings, think about 1 or 2 activities that will get you out of the house, that will boost your mood, help you expend some energy, and really anchor your weekend around those. And it's like we talked about, it's hard to be spontaneous in the winter. So really making a plan ahead and being planful about that time to really protect your mood and buffer against just the harsh effects of winter.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you're saying like basically non-work times are really kind of the danger zones, right? Those times when you're free to do whatever you want, and for a lot of people who suffer with this, that do whatever they want would be get under the covers at home.
Exactly. That's when it's so much easier to give in to the demands of hibernation. And certainly it's hard to get up and get out for work in the winter as well. But it is those down periods where we're going to be more prone to do the things that are kind of less helpful for our mood and energy.
Dr. Sally Weinstein, clinical psychologist, friend of the stream, associate professor, University of Illinois at Chicago. Thank you for the enlightening conversation. Thank you for the tips, and we appreciate you helping us to stay healthy.
Thank you.
All right, and that does it for us. I'm Brad Edwards. Now back to the stream.